Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a fascinating plunge into model predictive control, or MPC.
Hmm.
You've likely encountered its influence in various advanced systems,
Right.
from the precise movements of robots, industrial automation, even the sophisticated controls in modern vehicles.
Definitely.
At its heart, MPC is really a strategy for making optimal control decisions over a set period, while importantly respecting the system's limitations.
Precisely. Think of it like planning a multi-stage journey, right? You have a destination that's the desired path. You want the best route, minimum effort, but you have to factor in real-time stuff like traffic, detours, even fuel capacity.
Yeah.
Those are the system limitations. MPC does something similar, but continuously in real time for dynamic systems.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, our focus is a really interesting recent study. It looked at how different settings within an MPC system affect its ability to navigate a simulated environment. Basically, they had this virtual ball trying to follow a path and dodge obstacles. So our mission today is to break down the findings. The researchers systematically tweaked 5 key parameters to see exactly how they influence the ball's navigation.
And it offers some genuinely illuminating insights. Using a virtual setup like that lets you isolate each parameter's effect really cleanly. It's a great chance to see how these controllers tick.
Okay, let's get into it. The 5 parameters they looked at were MPC weights, the deviation threshold, correction factor, prediction horizon, and control horizon. We're going to go through each one. So first up, MPC weights. My understanding is he's basically tell the controller what to prioritize, like how much to stick to the path versus minimizing effort.
Yeah, exactly. The study focused on the weights for the ball's X and Y position.
And what's interesting here is the trade-off, right? If you crank up the weights for sticking to the path, the controller will focus on that. But the study found that while, higher weights initially meant tighter tracking,
Right.
pushing them too high actually led to bigger overall errors. They measured this with root mean square error, RMSE.
Yeah, RMSE basically gives you the average size of the errors. Higher RMSE, bigger average deviation from the path.
And these weren't small increases either, were they?
Yeah.
The study showed, like in some tests, increasing the weights bumps the RMSE by over 20%, even nearly 40% compared to the baseline.
Yeah.
It sounds like the ball started moving pretty erratically.
Exactly. Oscillatory motion. The controller got so obsessed with fixing tiny deviations that it started overreacting, making the overall path less accurate. But, and this is fascinating, this overcorrection, while bad for accuracy, sometimes reduced collisions.
Wait, really? So being less aggressive in correcting, even if it wasn't perfectly on path, somehow made it better at avoiding obstacles. That seems backwards.
It does, doesn't it?
The study noted the baseline and the highest weight tests had 0 collisions, but the ones with moderately higher weights did have a collision. Could it be that the less forceful corrections kept the system more stable overall, making it easier to see and avoid obstacles later?
That's a really sharp observation. It suggests maybe less rigidity and sticking to the exact path gives more flexibility for, general awareness. The study also looked at minimum clearance from obstacles.
Wow.
And they saw higher weights led to the ball navigating more cautiously with a bigger safety margin. In one test, the clearance went from, say, 0.19 meters up to 0.35 meters, so wider berth, even if the route wasn't spot on.
Okay, that makes sense. Less aggressive correction, more buffer space, even if it means sacrificing some path perfection. Got it. Now let's move to the deviation threshold. This sounds like the controller saying, okay, how far off is too far off? It sets the limit before correction kicks in.
Exactly. And the findings here were also quite revealing. You might think constantly correcting every tiny wobble is best, right?
Seems logical.
But the data said otherwise. Lower thresholds, meaning the controller jumped in for even minor deviations, actually increased the RMSE. In one test with a really low threshold, RMSE went up almost 14%. It's like trying to hold a pen perfectly still. The more you try to fix every tiny tremor, the shakier it gets overall.
Huh. Good analogy. So it was overreacting, making the path less smooth, like trying to steer a bike with constant, tiny, jerky movements. You'd just wobble more.
Precisely. And just like with the weights, this had a knock-on effect on collisions. The lowest deviation threshold had the most collisions, 3 in that test, probably because those abrupt corrections messed up the obstacle avoidance. Higher thresholds, generally fewer collisions, smoother paths.
Interesting. So a bit of tolerance letting small errors slide actually led to better overall performance and safety sometimes. And the minimum clearance. I bet tight thresholds didn't leave much room around obstacles.
You got it. The lowest threshold corresponded to the smallest minimum clearance, just 0.029 meters in one case. The system was so focused on the line, it didn't have the flexibility to maneuver safely.
All right, next. Correction factor. This sounds like it dictates how big the correction is when a deviation happens, like a gentle nudge or a big shove back onto the path.
You'd think this would matter a lot, wouldn't you? But surprisingly, across the range, they tested 25 up to 400. This parameter showed no noticeable impact. Not on RMSE, not on collisions, not on clearance.
Whoa, really? So whether it was a small nudge or a big push, it didn't really change the outcome in these tests. Makes you wonder when it would matter, right? Maybe with much bigger deviations or a more complex dynamic environment.
Exactly. It really highlights how context-dependent these parameters can be. This study gives us a valuable snapshot, but just for this specific setup.
Right, okay. Prediction horizon. This is about foresight, yeah. How many future steps the controller looks at when planning? Longer horizon means looking further ahead.
Correct. And that introduces a classic trade-off. The study found shorter horizons meant quicker reactions to immediate deviations, which actually gave slightly better short-term RMSE in one test. But longer horizons allowed for better long-term planning and smoother overall paths. It's like, do you focus just on the car right in front, or do you anticipate the traffic flow several cars ahead?
So short-sighted fixes versus looking ahead to prevent bigger problems. Makes sense? What about collisions? How did prediction horizon affect those?
Pretty clearly, shorter horizons led to more collisions. Which fits, right. If you're only looking a few steps ahead, you might not see that obstacle in time to dodge effectively.
Yeah.
Longer horizons, on the other hand, let the system anticipate and avoid obstacles much better. 0 collisions in the tests with longer horizons.
And minimum clearance followed suit, I imagine. Looking further ahead gives more time to adjust.
Yep. The test with the longest prediction horizon also had the largest minimum clearance. More look-ahead capability meant more time to plan and execute avoidance maneuvers with a bigger safety margin.
Okay, finally, the control horizon. This is about how often the controller updates its plan within that prediction window, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
How frequently it reevaluates and potentially adjusts the plan it made based on the prediction horizon.
Let me guess. Another surprise.
Yeah, much like the correction factor, varying the control horizon within the tested range didn't really move the needle. RMSE, collisions, clearance all stayed pretty consistent regardless of the update frequency.
That is surprising. You'd think more frequent updates would always be better, allow for finer control.
Yeah,
But maybe in this setup, the computational cost didn't bring enough performance benefit.
that's a good way to put it. Perhaps the overall plan from the prediction horizon was just more dominant than how often it got tweaked. Maybe in really high speed or super dynamic situations, that update frequency would become critical.
So summing up the big takeaways from this study, it really hammers home that tuning the MPC weights and the deviation threshold is super critical for balancing path following accuracy with obstacle avoidance. No magic bullet setting.
Absolutely. And the prediction horizon adds another layer, that trade-off between reacting fast now versus planning well for later, especially when safety's involved.
And while the correction factor and control horizon didn't seem crucial here in these tests,
Right.
it doesn't mean they're always irrelevant.
Yeah.
It just shows how complex MPC tuning is and how much it depends on the specific job and the environment.
And we definitely need to remember the study's limitations. As the researchers noted, it was a simplified virtual world, static obstacles. Plus, they used that one factor at a time testing method.
Right, OFAT. So they didn't see how changing one parameter might affect how another parameter works. Like changing the weights might have a totally different effect depending on where the deviation threshold is set.
Exactly. The study itself suggests future work using a full factorial analysis to really dig into those interactions. That'd be super valuable.
Yeah, and testing wider parameter ranges, more complex scenarios, dynamic obstacles that would give a much fuller picture.
Definitely.
Oh, and one last nuance. They mentioned that time-aligned RMSE metric. Even if the ball followed the path shape perfectly, if it was lagging behind or speeding ahead of where it was supposed to be time-wise, that could still increase the RMSE. A good reminder that path accuracy isn't just about space, it's about timing too.
Absolutely. The temporal aspect matters.
So bottom line, understanding these parameter dynamics is key to using MPC effectively. It's all about finding that sweet spot, that balance between accuracy, efficiency, safety, all those competing goals.
Precisely. And the study gives us a really useful framework for thinking about how to tune those knobs for specific situations.
Okay, now for a final thought for you, our listener, to chew on. Think about how the ideal tuning might change dramatically. Imagine our virtual ball is now a self-driving car in a chaotic city versus maybe a drone mapping a huge empty field. Which parameters suddenly become way more critical, which less so?
Good question.
How does balancing speed versus safety in the city, or maybe precision versus battery life in the field, change those tuning decisions? It's pretty fascinating to consider, right?
It really is. It highlights just how adaptable MPC can be, but also how crucial, thoughtful, context-aware tuning is for making it work well in the real world.